Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Nawaz Habib.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Upgrade Podcast. This is Dr. Habib. I am here with JP, my co-host.
Great to be here.
And we have a wonderful guest today, Dr. Anthony Chaffee. This episode of the Health Upgrade Podcast is brought to you by Truvaga. Have you been looking for a simple way to feel calmer, think clearer, and sleep better? Imagine achieving this with just 2 minutes a day. I'm excited to introduce you to Truvaga, a handheld device that supports your nervous system through gentle vagus nerve stimulation. As a doctor specializing in functional health and wellness, I've seen firsthand how Truvaga has accelerated healing in my clients. I've used this device to help people with a range of issues, from sleep disturbances and heart palpitations to digestive dysfunction, nervous system imbalances, and mental wellness concerns. The results have honestly been remarkable. Truvaga is designed to catalyze and accelerate the shift in your body from fight or flight to rest, digest, and recover mode, helping you manage stress, maintain mental clarity, and unwind more easily. It's not just theory. I've witnessed its positive impact on real people facing real health challenges. The best part? Truvaga fits seamlessly into your routine. No need to carve out hours for wellness. Just 2 minutes a day can make a difference. It's a small investment of time for potentially significant benefits in how you feel and function each day. If you're curious to experience Truvaga for yourself, visit truvaga.com/upgrade. You can save $30 on your device by using the code UPGRADE30 at checkout. Remember, that's truvaga.com, truvaga.com/upgrade. It might just be the first step towards a calmer, clearer you, just as it has been for many of my clients. Great to see you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
We're really excited to do this. We're excited about technology allowing us to do this because you're in Australia and we're on the East Coast of North America. And so allowing us to have this amazing conversation is very exciting for all of us. We are really interested in how diet affects our overall health and how nutrients affect our physiology. And I feel like that's really where your specialty lies in understanding the nutrients that are required to optimize our human physiology. And I want to just get started understanding your journey getting into kind of your life traveling around. I imagine played a big role in this, but then you entered athletic competition and med school around the same time. And then your journey into discovering the carnivore diet. I'd love to hear kind of your journey and how that came to be.
Yeah, I played sports since I was a kid, and I've always been interested in going to medical school, and so I've always been interested in human biology and biological sciences and math and physics and everything. So it was just a sort of an academic family. My father was a physicist, mathematician. My mother's family. My mother was a singer, but also it was very academic. But just loved reading and studying and learning and things like that. So both families had a lot of these influences. But so as an athlete, and as an aspiring medical student, I was very interested in human biology, also nutrition, because that made sense to me. It was like, hey, I want to know the right nutrition for my body as an athlete because I want to fuel my body with the right stuff. That was also something that was instilled in me. Dr. Pritikin was a household name where when I grew up, just, you have to do this for your heart, and you have to not eat fat and do all that sort of stuff. So it was instilled in me that food is very important, and it can have very serious and dire consequences on your health or very positive effects. And so that was never lost on me. And then so when I was studying my undergraduate degree, I would take human nutrition classes, biology classes, all these other sorts of things, because I wanted to know what the right fuel was. But it was a classic sort of treatment that you're given majority of your calories from carbohydrates and this much from protein and just a little bit from fat and all that sort of stuff. And it wasn't very clever stuff. It was just sort of regurgitated. I mean, you could guess at the entire curriculum just by growing up in America and just being like, oh, this is just sort of what you do. And then it just codified that and you're like, oh, okay, here's some percentages that go along with it. But there wasn't anything too new in that. Obviously, biochemistry, that's real nutrition. You're actually seeing how these chemicals interplay in your body. And I feel that that's real nutrition. So I did get some real nutrition when I studied biochemistry. what really changed and opened my eyes was when I was taking cancer biology, actually at the University of Washington, as JP was saying he had attended as well. I had a professor there at cancer biology who very early on just started talking about how there were a lot of natural carcinogens that were in our environment that we didn't really realize. And a lot of them had to do with food items that we were eating on a regular basis, not just junk food and the artificial ingredients, because that's pretty straightforward, but the things like fruits and vegetables that maybe we didn't realize. And he was pointing out that plants are living organisms, and like all living organisms, they have natural defenses, or else they become extinct, they go away. And so obviously these plants have been around for hundreds of millions of years, some of them. They have very robust defenses, and they're chemical in nature. So they make about 1 million different defensive chemicals, and they can be quite harmful. If you get physiological harm and stress long term, that can predispose you to getting cancer. And so we looked at carcinogens. It was a cancer biology class, after all. And so he was looking at, and he showed us the different carcinogens that were in regular fruits and vegetables that we'd eat on an everyday basis. So Brussels sprouts, he said, had 136 known carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts, and over 100 known carcinogens in mushrooms, and every other fruit and vegetable you ever had, grains, cereals, nuts, all these sorts of things, had dozens, if not over 100 known carcinogens, and they were quite abundant. We know from the work of Professor Bruce Ames from UC Berkeley, who published various studies in the 80s and 90s, looking at the difference between the pesticides we spray on these, which are known poisons, known toxins that we use in order to poison and kill the animals and insects trying to eat our crops, that the naturally occurring pesticides and insecticides in the produce items like fruits and vegetables outweighed the pesticides we sprayed on them by a factor of 10,000. So 99.99% of the pesticides on plants were naturally occurring within the plant. So it doesn't matter if you had this organic in your own garden or anything like that. 99.99% of them by weight were naturally occurring. They were already there. You can't get rid of them. And they were actually quite harmful. So they found that the particular, this was before glyphosate became so widely used, but the pesticides that they were using at the time, one was Alar. They looked at that and they said, and they found that in laboratory studies that they found it was a few hundred times more likely to cause cancer. The mushrooms were a few hundred times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticide Alar. And so, I mean, the whole point of this was for him to say, hey, everyone's getting up in arms about these pesticides. They're saying, hey, these are poisons, and they are, but in the doses we're using them, actually it's a drop in the bucket. The plants are even worse. And at that time, everybody thought that fruits and vegetables were just the bee's knees. So he said, well, we all know that fruits and vegetables are good for you, and they're way more toxic than the pesticides. Well, obviously, the pesticides can't be all that bad, can they? Well, that's a value judgment,
A flawed argument, logically.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's a value judgment. That's his opinion, but that's not what the data showed. The data showed that the plants themselves had 10,000 times the amount of toxins, of the toxins they knew about at the time. And when I took cancer biology 10 years after that, there were far more. I mean, he had identified 42 different toxins in these various plants, 20 of which were found to be carcinogenic in the lab. And 10 years later, they already knew about 136 just in Brussels sprouts. So there's probably more than 10,000 times the toxins in plants naturally occurring. But that's the thing. What he showed was that these natural toxins found in plants were 10,000 times more abundant and hundreds of times more likely to cause cancer than known toxins and pesticides. That's what that shows. That's what the data shows. So my professor was imparted this on us, and we were absolutely blown away. And we really couldn't believe what we were hearing. We thought he was joking. Everyone was thrashing around looking like, is this a joke? Is someone is there like a TA somewhere snickering in the corner? And they weren't. And so there was just, everyone sort of settled down, realized that he was serious. I remember it was just quiet for a while. I was like, buzzing, like, what the hell? And then it was just sort of silent. And I remember thinking in my head, like, well, vegetables are still good for you though, right? And I remember him just looking at us, and he just sort of gave us a funny look. And I felt like he read my mind, because he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. I'm like, right? Screw plants. And I walked out of there, and I was just shell shocked. I didn't know what to do. I went straight to the grocery store, QFC in U Village, and I just was walking around. I'm like, what? what do I do? Where do I go? Like, what do I eat? Like, what the hell? Like, everything has plants in it. Everything's a plant or has plants or something like that. I couldn't figure it out. And then I was just sort of just walking around aimlessly, trying to see something that didn't contain plants. And I finally just walked by some eggs. And I was like, okay, eggs. Get some eggs. They don't come from plants. And there's just some meat. I'm like, okay, meat. I can get meat. And that was my criteria. I was just like, I would not eat anything that came from a plant or a fungus. And I did that for 5 years, and I never felt better in my entire life. I absolutely felt like a superhero. I stopped drinking at the same time too during the rugby season, and I put everything on that because obviously that's a huge thing, and it definitely did make a huge difference. But I didn't realize what an impact the not eating the plants had as well, and so I massively improved my performance as an athlete, as a rugby player, as an All-American rugby player, playing at collegiate level and a senior premiership level, as a late teenager and university and things like that. And I was always younger as well because I started college when I was 16. So I was always sort of playing up, and I played a bit of high school sports as well, but that would also play college sports at the same time, and then men's sports as well. And then this just absolutely catapulted my athletic performance to a completely different level. So had a lot of, good success with rugby, really couldn't get tired, couldn't run out of energy. I didn't even get sore after working out. It was just, bruised, battered, sure, but it wasn't anything as bad as it had been before. And the muscle soreness I didn't even really get. That's one thing that seems to upset people more than anything. When I tell them I don't get like the delayed onset muscle soreness, and they're like, yes, you do, you're a liar. And I'm like, try it. Don't eat plants for 2 weeks. See what happens. Go to the gym. Like, you won't get sore. And so I felt absolutely amazing. I was playing professionally in England, rugby, and I sort of started slipping off, and I sort of had some. It was just sort of a pain in the ass. It wasn't really the same kind of meat or even the quality of meat that really upsets people in England. But I'm sorry, I just wasn't very good. And like the meat was like injected with water or something like that. I could not get this stuff to brown. It would cook all the way through and be well done, and it was still like gray and sweaty on the outside. I couldn't. I think it was really they were injecting it with water wherever like grocery store I was going to was doing that. And so I was just like, all right, well, that's annoying. And so I ended up getting a lot of eggs, and then they had this chicken that was crumbed, and that's just crumbs on it. And I remember like, oh, should I do that? There's plant toxins in there, there's plants in there. And I'm like, ugh. And I said, like, well, dose makes the poison. Maybe it's, not that big a deal, just a small amount, only a couple times a week. But it actually made a big difference. I didn't realize that. And I always thought that I felt so amazing because I wasn't drinking. I still wasn't drinking, and I didn't feel amazing, and I didn't know what the hell was going on. And I could still play, I could still perform, but I had all these niggling injuries and soreness and aches. And I thought I hadn't had like an actual ongoing pulled muscle for years at that point. Now I had a ton of these things. I thought I needed surgery or something. I thought I had like some sort of like groinal hernia or something like that. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Why does this always hurt? This shouldn't hurt. Like, what's going on? And I couldn't figure it out. But once that little foot got wedged in the door, putting in some crumbed chicken and things like that, then it was like, well, maybe everyone was using ketchup there. They just call it sauce. It's so prevalent. They had like the rugby house, there were like 30 bottles of ketchup in the fridge, and they just put that on everything. So I was like, oh, some salt. I was like, well, I guess maybe I'll put something on something. And then it was like, just a little bit more and a little bit more. And I ended up slipping back onto a very clean, omnivorous, heavily meat-based diet, which was always my want. But I did not feel as good. I never felt as good. And I remember just chalking it up to age. I just figured I was 25 now and just dying. My body was just breaking down, and that was it. And it wasn't for another 12 years that I came across information that was just very clear to me that, well, no, humans just biologically are carnivores. That's just the kind of animal that we are. I learned that in second grade, that humans have been apex predators for 2 million years. Apex predators are by definition carnivores. That's what that word means. You predate on other animals, and you're at the top of the food chain. And so I looked back on that time period of my life and realized that that's actually what I was doing. I was living as a carnivore. I was eating to my biological design, and I'd never felt better in my entire life. And that 5-year period between 20 and 25, when I was doing that inadvertently, I never felt better in my entire life. And I was always trying to get back to that. I was always trying to see, like, what was that? How did I get back to that? It was like, heroin addicts chasing the dragon. Like, how do I get back to that feeling? And I couldn't figure it out. And then all of a sudden it just hit me. That was it. That's what I was doing. And so at that point, I was just eating greens like kale, spinach, and broccoli. very clean, and then a lot of lean meat, and actually not that much lean meat because I was trying to slim down. I just got back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh, and I was just trying to slim up so I could get back to playing rugby. And it wasn't working, and I didn't feel great, and I was bloated and sore all the time and just didn't feel good. And then I just cut out the vegetables and started massively increasing the amount of fatty meat that I ate. And I dropped 23 pounds in 10 days. All this inflammation flooded out of my body. I think most of that was water weight, but it's like a lot of inflammation left my body. All of a sudden, my back didn't hurt anymore. My knees didn't hurt. Brain fog lifted. I didn't have red eyes anymore. I always had like red eyes. I thought it was allergies. That was gone. My asthma's gone. And I just felt so amazing at 38 years old. I said, right, it's time to go back and play some rugby. And completely out of shape, hadn't, run properly in months because I'd been in Bangladesh, hadn't played a full season of rugby in 3 years. And I go back out and it was just a dead sprint the whole time. And I remember thinking, I was like, well, should I ease into this and just, see how I go? And I'm like, no, when I was in my early 20s and I was doing this, I could just push myself as hard as I pushed myself, my body would give me more. So I said, right, let's just see how hard I can go. And I was just as hard as I could go, no problem at all. And so I was right back into it and just felt great. And so after that, I said, okay, this is something, and this is something that I should take seriously. And I just started digging into the research and the literature. And I found this entire body of literature that never gets taught to us in medical school or residency that is extremely pertinent. Large-scale randomized controlled trials in humans with thousands of subjects showing massive benefits to health and specific medical outcomes and diseases with a high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diet, which a carnivore diet is. And I was like, right, okay. And I started asking questions and saying, okay, well, if this is the case, we should see something like this. Okay. And so you start looking in the literature. Okay, do we have studies on that? If you have two competing theories, you should be able to find evidence with which to test them against. So I just started trying to find evidence to test those ideas against. And then I got to the point where I was just like, wow, there is just an abundance of evidence showing that this is the way we should be eating, and we should really be avoiding plants, and cholesterol is not a problem. It's actually really good for us, saturated fat as well. And then plants are not so good. And so I said, okay, I don't want to be in a subject of or a victim of confirmation bias. What am I missing? There's all these vegan doctors and nutritionists out there. Okay, what are they saying? What do they know that I don't know? So I started going to their websites and looking at their work and looking at their books and things like that. I was like, okay, what am I missing here? And every single thing of it was either easily disprovable based on a lie, such as cholesterol causes heart disease. That's pretty much the only thing they have against me that they can really quantify in real terms. Like, oh no, look, there's this thing. There's all these other fairy things. It's just like, oh, there's this association with X, Y, and Z. But that was one that they were like, they were really stuck on, which is not true. That's been thoroughly disproven at the time. We don't even need to look at current data. At the time, it was false. And other things are just flat out lies. I mean, there are people that are now trying to say that humans evolved as herbivores. Like no one has ever made that serious contention.
We have one stomach, we have eye teeth, we have stereoscopic vision. We are predators. I mean, it's pretty obvious. We may not have claws, but we certainly are designed to be carnivores.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, we have evidence in the fossil record of using rocks as pound stones to crack open the skulls of animals to get at the brain of animals that had already been picked clean by other creatures for millions of years. And about 3.3 million years ago, Australopithecus had the first sharpened stone tool. And there's clear evidence of butchery marks on these bones of these animals that were found in abundance around these, early human enclaves or pre-human enclaves. And then with the advent of the Ice Age, Homo habilis and our early ancestors there, they were able to springboard into apex predators. They had tools and they had the capability. And there's this choke point. Most of the early humans of that era died out. They were the ones that were trying to eat an omnivorous diet or more of an herbivorous diet. And the ones that survived were the carnivores, were the ones that were able to figure out how to be apex predators and take down these, big, massive megafauna. Yeah. And people say, well, no. And this is what the vegans try to say now too. They make things up because they want, it has to be true for that to fit their worldview. And so they don't even look it up. They just say it and hope that no one calls them on it. But I've heard them say, well, no, when the ice ages came down, people scurried away towards the equator where all the tropical fruits and everything were. That's actually not the case. The fossil record is very clear. As the ice shelves were coming down, Homo habilis went up into the ice. And that's where the megafauna was. So what else is there to eat in an ice age in the Arctic Circle besides meat? Like, I'm sorry. Like, if you can't thrive on meat alone, you cannot survive in those conditions. What were people eating during the last ice age when they crossed the land bridge from Asia to North America in the Arctic Circle, 1,500 miles north of Seattle, where at the time Seattle was under a mile-high block of ice? Okay, what is there to eat? What is going to grow up there besides animals? It's nothing. And what do they eat? They eat seed.
Animals that are eating animals.
Yeah, animals that are eating animals, exactly. And they go down that animals are eating animals, eating animals, eating animals that are eating like plankton in the ocean. Like, that's it.
Turtles all the way down.
Yeah, exactly. Turtles all the way down. And so that was it. What else are we going to eat? So, we have clear documentation that humans and clear evidence that humans and our ancestors have been alive and thriving in the Arctic Circle during the ice ages. So I'm sorry.
Well, even beyond that, we had Thomas Seyfried on. I'm sure you're familiar with some of his work. Great thinker, great guy. And he talks about the fact that cancer was literally unheard of among the Inuits, and the Inuits lived on blubber. They weren't even eating, they were living on the blubber of seals and walruses and other animals. They weren't eating any vegetables because there just weren't any to be found. I do want to ask you a question, because the way you explain how you've experienced this, I don't know if you mean it this way, so I'm giving you a chance to tell me one way or the other. It seems very digital. It seems like the moment that even like a little breading on a piece of fried chicken came into your world, all of a sudden you were more susceptible to injury and you couldn't run as fast and couldn't do these things. For example, I started going on a carnivore diet largely, but not quite to the extreme that you are, but very much, the only snack I had was beef jerky, that sort of thing. And eating steaks every night, and doing the intermittent fasting. And I'm coming up on 56 years old. And I'll tell you that for the last year, I've run no less than 10 miles and typically a half marathon every day. Have not had a single injury, knock on wood. And I've never felt this good. I've dropped down to my lowest weight since I was in high school. As a 56-year-old, having abdominal muscles showing is not normal, but, I have that. And my oldest daughter, who decided after watching me, she's very vain, after watching me, do this, she said, I'm going to do that too. And she's dropped 30 pounds, really just, eating eggs, eating steak. She comes home at night and wants a steak and eggs. And that's her diet. Now, she's nowhere near as religious about it as you were. And I'm not as religious about it as you were. And I shouldn't use the word religious. I'm thoughtful and dedicated as you are. So I'm just asking, is it a digital thing for you, or do you feel like there really is that poison is in the dosing, and you can tolerate some? Because I still have an arugula salad, and I like mushrooms occasionally and things like that. So where do you stand on that?
Yeah, well, no, dosage does make the poison sometimes, but the dosage is real small. So for me, that bit of breading was absolutely enough to cause a lot of inflammation. I think carbohydrates, grains, those sorts of things have more of these inflammatory factors as well. So it is obviously also the case of different plants are going to have a different constellation of toxins that are going to be more or less deleterious to our health. The vast majority of plants on Earth will kill us or make us extremely sick. So out of the 400,000 plants in the world, we eat a very, very fraction of 1% of these things. And in fact, the majority of the plants that we eat are derived and bred from a single root source that now, like the Brassica family, that's from a single plant, progenitor. And there's like 160 plus of these plants, and they're all related. They're all the same thing. So they have very similar toxins in them. So we found something that wasn't as horrible for us. We had more, not that they're less horrible because they'll still kill most animals, but we have more defenses against them. We can detoxify these poisons better than we can other things. Like, we can't eat eucalyptus, but a koala can just fine. We get very sick, but a koala would get very sick if it ate spinach. And so, it has the defenses towards towards the toxins in eucalyptus, but it doesn't have the defenses towards all plants. And so food is very species specific. And so some things are better or worse. The vast majority of plants are inedible, meaning they're so toxic that we would do very poorly if we ate them. Then through technology and intellect, we figured out how to chemically alter different plants in order to detoxify or lower the toxic load. Fermentation is a major advent in human discovery post-agriculture. We're able to ferment these foods. That's what a ruminant animal does, like a cow or a sheep. They're able to ferment this stuff first, and that breaks down a lot of these toxins. The bacteria break it down, a lot of these toxins, release a lot of these nutrients, and then the cow or the sheep gets it. So we do that outside of the body, and we ferment this stuff first. There are a lot of different processes like nixtamalization. That's where the word tamale comes from. And that was what the people in Mesoamerica did to corn in order to lower the toxic load and bring out more of the nutrients. And so there's a 7-step chemical process that this went through. And then we just said, ooh, corn, that's cool. And they just took that and did not take the process. And we actually got serious harm from that. Actually, hundreds of thousands of people died of pellagra because of that, because corn has a lot of niacin in it, but it's bound up in ways that we can't access, right? Because we're not biologically designed to eat corn. So we don't have the enzymes to break down those bonds.
Is it any animal has that problem, or are there some like ruminants, and I have to ask you, there's probably 2 questions buried in one then. There are animals like cows that are grass-fed or grain-fed or corn-fed. Are you saying that as a result of the way their digestion works, they never actually get the toxins into the meat? And as a result, or is it, because obviously there's a big thing about eating grass-fed meat versus corn-fed. It used to be, you go to a great steakhouse, they say, we got corn-fed beef here, as if that's a good thing. And, I'm still trying to sort through, is that better, or grain-fed, or is it grass-fed? Grass-fed seems now to be the thing that everybody wants, but,
Yeah, grass-fed is definitely better from a nutrition standpoint. The reason that a lot of people going carnivore now are using, doing like the so-called lion diet, where they're predominantly sticking to the ruminant meats, the red meats. Most people just naturally feel better. I gravitated towards the beef and really just beef. Because I liked it and I enjoyed it and I just felt the best on it. But looking into it, that's part of it. That definitely is part of it. They can get more nutrients out. They can detoxify more of these plant toxins, even plants that they're not designed to eat, because of that fermentation process. Now they can get poisoned. There's a whole body of veterinary medicine, livestock medicine, dealing with various illnesses and diseases that livestock get when eating the wrong plants specifically. So they can still get killed by plants. In fact, most plants will still kill a cow. But if it's not something that's going to be directly toxic and cause serious harm, they can detoxify more of it. Whereas like a pig or chicken or a fish that are monogastric like we are, they don't ferment and break this stuff down first. They actually just absorb it. And then their liver is just desperately trying to deal with the ramifications of that. But there are diseases that the cows get. Now, cows can just die if they eat the wrong plant. They typically don't unless they get stuck in a pasture and they run out of feed and forage and they have to eat plants that they're really not designed to. Or they're young enough and they just sort of are just eating things and carelessly, grab some, North American water hemlock. You have to sort of if you have young cows, you have to sort of clear that stuff out of there. When they get older, they get a bit more, shy of these things. They smell them and then avoid the things that they don't want. But, younger cows can get into trouble. But there are diseases like big head, big tongue, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome. Those are all diseases of livestock that we call them diseases. They have very particular constellation of symptoms, but
it's poison.
People have figured out that they've figured out that there's from poison from specific plants. And so they eat the wrong plant and they get this sickness. And then also muscular dystrophy. Cows get muscular dystrophy, which is kind of interesting. I learned that a couple of years ago from a rancher. And it's very similar to our muscular dystrophy as well. There's multiple different kinds of muscular dystrophy in humans, but there's a type of muscular dystrophy in cows. And they figured out, because cows are valuable, that this comes from a selenium deficiency. And so they're like, why the hell is my cow getting this? They had to figure it out. It's from a selenium deficiency. And so you supplement selenium, it goes away. And how many diseases are we contending with as humans that are one of those things where we're some toxic exposure to something we're really not biologically designed to eat, and or we're not getting all the nutrients that we need. And this is something that more people are understanding, but we don't even realize how nutritionally deficient that we are and how malnourished we are, because when we go get lab tests, we say, oh, my B12 is fine, I feel sick, but all my bloods are in the right levels, and so my doctor doesn't have anything that they can do for me. They say, you're fine, it's all in your head, you're just getting older, some of that nonsense, but the problem is that those reference ranges are actually the average for the community. So the first few thousand people that come into that lab and get a blood test, that becomes the reference range. And so you do the average of that, 2 standard deviations from the norm, and that's 95% of the population. Bam, perfect. And so as long as you're in that, as long as you're in average, you're not low. Well, I'm sorry, but if everybody's malnourished, all of a sudden no one's now malnourished. And now it's covering up for these malnourishments. And so I see this with B12. Everybody's B12 deficient. I just see everybody's B12 deficient except for long-term carnivores. And then sometimes when people have MTHFR gene mutation, they need a bit of liver, even carnivores. They'll be at much better levels of B12, but maybe not what I would call perfect. So they have done studies, some of them in Germany, where they looked at people in their 20s, average age 25 for men and women, and they had very simple criteria: just normal BMI, don't have any diagnosed medical illnesses, not a high bar, wildly different reference ranges. So if you look at those, you just compare yourself to a healthy, seemingly healthy population, you get very different reference ranges. And there's people that study this and say, actually, I would say that this is the healthy reference range. Like there's a couple in Frankfurt, Germany, professors there at the University of Frankfurt, who've been studying, vitamin D in humans for 25, 30 years, and they've come up with this set of reference range. Say, hey, this is what we found to be the optimal reference range. Like I'm going to take that over the random average in my town. And so, how many people? I mean, almost everybody is malnourished, and then I would say, well, only 15% of vegans are vitamin B12 deficient. 100% of vegans are B12 deficient, unless you're taking massive amounts of B12 and weekly or 2 weekly injections or something like that. And even then, I would wonder. But I talk to people and they say, well, I'm fine. My B12 is great as a vegan. And my answer is, I bet you it's not. I bet you it's not. Oxford University published a paper in 2008 that looked at people's B12 levels and did regular MRIs on them. And they found that people that had under 330, I think it's 330 picomoles per picomoles per liter, which is probably US numbers like 450, 500 picograms per milliliter, somewhere around that people under that, after 5 years on serial MRIs, their brain shrank by 5% volume, right? And yet most reference ranges go down to like 130, 150. And they say, if you're over 150, you're fine. No, you're not. You can actually get demyelination and damage your axons and nerve damage and brain damage, because you require B12 to myelinate your nerves. And you have this constant changeover and breakdown and repair of all your tissue. And myelin is no different. And so you're having constant breakdown and constant repair. But if you don't have enough B12, then you can't do the repair part. You only get the breakdown. And so you get demyelination.
I know we have a family associate who has lost partial use of her quadriceps because of B12 deficiency. She had to start getting injections just because of demyelination of the nerves. It's crazy. Let me ask you a question about some things like polyphenols and some other things that are typically acquired or ingested as a result of eating berries or other things. Is it in high enough concentrations in the meat in order for you to get those things, or are they just sort of nutrients that are not really that important and you don't need them?
Yeah. Well, studies have shown that grass-fed beef has actually more of these sort of phytonutrients, a higher concentration of these phytonutrients than the plants themselves. Because these are nutrients that are good for the cow too, and so they store those and use those, and then that's good for us. I mean, that goes back to your question about what's better, grain-fed versus grass-fed. Well, they're both very good, and certain plants, grains, and things like that they'll make the animal sick. It gives them diabetes. It makes them store excess fat. They get intramuscular fat called myosteatosis, which is a clear sign of pathology and metabolic distress in the body in humans. We cause fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in ducks and geese called foie gras by force feeding them grains and all these sorts of things. So we're doing these same things to humans that we knowingly do to animals to fatten them up and make them sick and for slaughter. And very quickly, as a little bit of a distraction, they did the same thing with fattening up hogs. I found a paper from 1930s talking about the best way to fatten up hogs for lard. That was the main staple product from pigs back then. And they said the best way to fatten up hogs is give them a combination of grains and skim milk, which was a byproduct of the cream and butter industry. And they said that there's nothing special about this that makes them fat. It just causes them to overeat even more than anything else, right? So they just get voraciously hungry. The carbohydrates raise insulin that blocks leptin, which is our satiety hormone. Our blood sugar drops. We get tired, and so we have to go eat more. And then we're being told we're starving all the time because our leptin is being blocked. And then the milk has some carbs as well, so that contributes to that. But it also has casomorphins, which tell the baby mammal to eat more, so they grow because babies are vulnerable. And so this combination of this causes these hogs to just eat and eat and eat and get obese as hell. Grains and skim milk. Does that ring a bell? Breakfast cereal, right? Kellogg's Corn Flakes, right? So
you're hungry at 9:30 in the morning after a bowl of cereal.
Yeah, that's it. And so, we're doing the same things to humans that we did to animals to fatten them up for slaughter. So when you're looking at the quality of the meat, grain finished versus grass fed, you're not going to get the same nutrient profile in grain finished. It'll be extremely nutritious. It'll still be more nutritious and more nutrient dense than anything else you could ever eat. But it won't be the same because the grains are not what a cow is designed to eat. And so it's not going to have the nutrients that a cow needs as well. And so it's going to start getting nutritionally depleted. And you see that white fat, we get very used to that. Fat is not white. Fat is yellow. If anybody's ever seen surgery on a human, you go or look up on YouTube abdominal surgery, it's yellow, bordering on orange. It's a very deep color. And that's what animal fat is supposed to be as well. And that's a lot of nutrients and beta carotenes and different sorts of things that are very important, and they get stripped out. And so you lose those nutrients. It also has a different constellation of omega-3s and omega-6s. You'll have more linoleic acid versus arachidonic acid, which is actually the omega-6 that you need. And you'll have much less of the DHA and EPA, which are the omega-3s that we need, which are only coming from animal sources. So, when you grain finish a cow for 90 days or more, some studies have shown that you actually don't have any DHA or EPA anymore. It's only omega-6s. And so that can change. The constellation of amino acids can change. Grain-finished beef has a much higher concentration of BCAA, it's a branched chain amino acids, which I don't think are that bad, but there are some studies suggesting that higher concentrations of BCAAs has been associated with fatty liver disease. It's an association. Association is not causation, but that freaks out some people. It will not have as much of the micronutrients either. There are some people that have published their, the nutrition facts of their meat. And these are regenerative farmers, by the way. So it's regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished. So, they're moving around pastures. It's better for the land. It's better for the animal. They get much more nutrients as a result. Comparing that to the USDA average for grain finished. And some of these have 4 to 5 times the number of vitamins and minerals that are in there. And those phytonutrients would be among those as well. So, the cows are eating these plants, and the nutrients in those plants are what they're going for. And so, they want to keep those. And so there's actually more in there, and they're a filter. They're a perfect filter because especially when they're eating the plants that they're supposed to eat, they have the biomechanics to break down and detoxify these, and even other things too. I saw an article where they were saying that ruminant animal, the rumen, fermentation process could actually break down glyphosate, and so, and that's a big one too. And so, I think a lot of people find that they do much better on the ruminant animals because most of the animals that we're fed now are eating things that they're not designed to eat. So the monogastrics are not going to be able to filter that out properly, but the ruminants can filter out more of it. So it's still fantastic. Is grass finished going to be better than that? I think so, but I think it's the difference between gold medal and silver medal at the Olympics. Silver medal lost to gold, and that's sad. But silver medal also beat everybody else on Earth. So it's not a bad position to be in at the end of the day.
So do you not eat fish or pork, or are you strictly because you're eating eggs, so you obviously chicken is in the mix as well. Where do you stand on dairy? Because it sounded like you thought that dairy was maybe not so good, but cheese and dairy. Where do you stand on that? And then, as a third question, sorry to just jam them all in. What about olive oil? I mean, olive oil gets heralded as, and coconut, oil, it gets heralded as filled with, the right balance, if not even a better balance of omega-3s versus omega-6s. Are you just strictly a beef tallow guy?
So to answer that one first, well, if you look at the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio in the plant oils, they're all far worse than animal fats, all of them. But it gets a bit more sneaky. But I think that's a sneaky thing to do in any case, because you don't need omega-3s and you don't need omega-6s. You need DHA and EPA, which are omega-3s, and you need arachidonic acid, which is an omega-6. You don't need any old omega-3 or omega-6. The plant omega-3s and omega-6s are different. So it's alpha linoleic acid is the omega-3s in plants. We don't need that. It's no good to us. And it doesn't convert into DHA or EPA properly. There are some studies that say maximum you get about 5% conversion. And there's other studies that show that as you increase alpha linoleic acid, DHA goes down, not up. So, and it also comes with a whole bunch of other things you don't want. And it has linoleic acid for its omega-6. You don't need or want linoleic acid. It's very pro-inflammatory. It's a very long, sort of fragile molecule and can break down and cause a lot of oxidative stress. You want arachidonic acid. And plants don't have any of those. Plants do not have DHA or EPA, and they don't have arachidonic acid. So, whatever their omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is, it's none of it you want anyway. And so it's no good. So it's a bit of a red herring. And but either way, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is actually much better in animal products, especially ones that are like, grass-fed tallow, things like that. Much better ratio. I do only eat animal fats, though, absolutely. There are a lot of problems with plant oils, even olive oils. And olive oil and coconut oil, the fruit oils, sort of pressed oils, are way better than the seed oils, the sort of industrial process sort of things. They're way better. But
They're actually edible, as opposed to
exactly.
The machine oils are not edible.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, but they have their own problems. They don't necessarily they have fats that are good for us. They don't have the essential fats that we need from animal fats. They don't exist. They also come with plant sterols, which are the plant's version of cholesterol. And that is similar enough to our cholesterol that when we absorb it, it sends a signal to our liver and says, hey, we have cholesterol coming in. You don't need to make as much. And cholesterol is a really important molecule. And this is actually utilized by doctors. Say, oh, you should eat these more plant oils and plant fats and eat, 25 almonds a day because that'll lower your cholesterol, because it'll tell your liver that, hey, we have cholesterol, don't make cholesterol. Like, why do we need to trick our body into going away from its natural design? That doesn't make any sense. But cholesterol is used for everything in your body. Every cell in your body is capable of making cholesterol. That's how important it is, including your brain. But also every cell in your body is made out of cholesterol. There's a lipid bilayer that's the cholesterol molecules. I learned that in 8th grade and I was blown away. I was like, how can cholesterol be bad for us? We're literally made out of cholesterol. And so it never made sense to me. But all your hormones are made out of cholesterol: testosterone, estrogen, progestogens, mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, DHEA, pregnenolone, cortisol, all these things. They're all made out of cholesterol. Vitamin D, which is a hormone, is made out of cholesterol. And so this is a very important molecule. And so we're getting these plant sterols. Our body doesn't really know how to use them properly. And there are some histology studies showing that actually some of these plant sterols can actually build up in the artery walls. And we're more aware of like trans fats that really builds up in artery walls. So our body just doesn't know what to do with this stuff. And so we sort of dump it in inappropriate places. Macrophages, it's very strange too, because macrophages, even if you get these foam cells, they actually really like human cholesterol. They hold on to it really tightly, but it just does not like plant sterols. They just dump it freely. And so some people are arguing that it's actually the plant sterols that are actually building up in your arteries, not human cholesterol. So for that and other reasons, I avoid plant oils. I certainly would never cook with them because they're unsaturated fats and they can oxidize and denature very quickly. And when you cook with them, as anybody who took chemistry knows, every 10 degrees Celsius, you increase a reaction, you double the reaction rate. So you bring something up to cooking temperature, you can increase this by millions of times. As far as what I eat, 99% of what I eat is beef. That's always what I prefer. I always feel best on that. I think it is more important for certain people to avoid the other meats. I'll have some pork. My girlfriend brought me like a pork sort of belly roast today for lunch, and that was very sweet of her, and that was fine. It tasted great, and I don't have a problem with that because I don't have as much sensitivities as other people do. People with autoimmunities in particular, they really do best on ruminant meat and water. And I actually have a new theory of actual cause of autoimmune. I don't think it's autoimmune at all, if you guys want to talk about that in a minute. But I don't have the problems with that. I still mostly eat beef because I just feel best on it. I do have eggs occasionally. I try to get pasture-raised eggs so that the chicken's eating what it's supposed to eat. When I eat fish, it's wild-caught fish. I wouldn't eat farmed fish. And I try to get pork and chicken that are done in the same way. We order directly from a rancher here in Australia that sponsor my podcast, and they do pasture-raised, grass-fed and finished. All animals are raised sort of in a natural way on the pasture, and so that's what we get. And I still predominantly will get beef as well. Dairy is a bit of a gray area. There are all sorts of amazing nutrients that are in dairy. Raw dairy is a very different creature than pasteurized dairy, Well, I think if someone's eating a mixed diet, I think dairy can be very valuable to add nutrients to that. I mean, all you have to do is look at Weston A. Price 100 years ago. We went to these native populations and found that they were extremely healthy, big, broad jaws, perfectly developed teeth, and facial bone structure was just, brilliant. And then in the same families or in the next generation down, all of a sudden they had micronathia and crooked teeth and different shapes of their palate and all these other sorts of things, and fallen dental arches and all that sort of stuff. And he figured out that there's largely to do with the fat-soluble vitamins that only exist in animal fats that just weren't prevalent in the meat, in the foods that they were sort of shifting to, which was more plant-based or more processed garbage that was available in the cities. And he got people back eating animal fats and animal foods and raw milk, and he could actually reverse their development, especially if they were young enough. And so I think that is full of extremely nutritious items, but if you're just eating meat, I don't think you need them. You're getting all those things in the meat. There can be some downsides, especially with autoimmunity. I think people with autoimmunity should probably avoid dairy. The casein seems to contribute or can contribute to leaky gut, which can be which is very strongly associated with many autoimmune diseases, pretty much all of them. And it can also be a bit pro-inflammatory. I mean, we evolved, we didn't, about 10, 15,000 years ago, we started having more dairy. But that was A2 dairy. So the casein was A2 and it's a bit less inflammatory, a bit more used to it. A1 dairy is more pro-inflammatory. And then again, of course, there's the carbohydrates. I do think that it's beneficial to be in a ketogenic state. I do think we get a lot of benefit from that for a lot of different reasons. Just keeping your insulin low is so much better because insulin is such an important molecule. It's involved in hundreds of different physiological processes in your body. And so if it's at its normal physiological level, then everything's in balance. And if you artificially raise that, then everything's out of balance. But it also has the casomorphines, which will trigger your hunger response and potentially cause you to overeat. Animals in the wild know exactly how much to eat and when to stop. You don't see fat giraffes and fat badgers that just have no self-control and they're just like, oh my God, that's Dave. He's just doing it. He's at it again. They're all lean and strong and healthy. Well, that's because they're exercising all the time. Well, what about animals in the zoo who live in a box and never get exercise? Have you ever seen a fat giraffe there? Because I haven't. So if they're eating their natural diet, then their body, they know when to stop eating, they know how much to eat, and their body works accordingly. And if they don't, they don't. And I think milk can contribute to that. And just like with the pigs back in the 1930s, milk can just cause you to overeat. And I do find that when people are trying to lose weight, especially, that dairy is a classic weight loss stall. And some people can even put on weight as well by doing that as well. So that's sort of the rundown. So I think definitely very good things in dairy, but I think there are some problematic issues as well. And so, see if that's something that benefits you and you're not putting on weight and you understand the principles behind dairy and what it can do to you, then, go for it. But, I don't use much dairy, some cheese sometimes, but not much.
Do you make your own tallow, or do you purchase it? Is it something you regularly buy? I know it's available at the store, but not usually in large quantities.
I have some jars. I mean, you can find different places that make like grass-fed tallow. And actually, here in Australia, there you can get little bricks of grass-fed tallow at most grocery stores. You just never see it. There's only one little piece for it. It's like generally in like the butter aisle. So there's just like all these just thousands of different options, and there's just this little brick of tallow out there. So, I've figured out where to find those. But yeah, I don't make my own. Quite often, sometimes one of the things I do when I order meat from this rancher, I talk to him about it, and it's like, hey, do you have? Everybody trims these, especially in Australia. My God, they just trim everything to a fault, and because they really took it to heart that the fat's bad for you. And so they just do not want anything to do with it. And in fact, a lot of the cows, they actually bred them to have less and less fat. The Japanese are growing these Wagyus, breeding them to be fatter and fatter and fatter. Australia's going the other way. We just want, these gamey little things, these little twigs. But then they trim off every scrap of fat off of that, which is insane. And they grain finish it. Why? What are you grain feeding it for? Like, it's just going to put on fat. And you just trim it off anyways. Like, what the hell's the point of that? And but what they did is that they're now selling the fat as it's deep yellow fat, and so they have these fat trimmings. So I'll buy packs of those, cut those up in little squares, fry them up in a pan, and put that. I have a pile of that next to my steak, and then the fat that renders out from that grass-fed fat, that's the fat I'm going to cook with, and then I just sort of leave some of that fat, like, the drippings from the steak, I'll leave that in there. So I'll have like a good, quarter of an inch of fat in there that I'll sort of fry these steaks in. It gives it sort of a bit of a crispy, sizzly crust as well when you do that, which is great, which I love.
One of the things that you kind of mentioned is that each individual will kind of have very unique foods that work for them, some that don't work for them may work for others. And there's almost this bioindividuality that we need to take into account, especially when it comes to conditions like autoimmunity or something along those lines. Have you come across any particular genetic predispositions, epigenetic type stressors, or noticed any particular patterns when it comes to who really can thrive on essentially more type of food and be okay with a little bit higher dose of some of these plant toxins versus those that need to be on a pretty strict carnivore style diet?
Well, almost everybody will do up, and it's all relative, isn't it? It's always compared to what. And so, most people relatively do fine. But especially if you have a clean, whole food sort of approach, and you have meat and all these the typical balanced diet without processed food, a lot of people do just fine compared to other people that are even sicker than them. And then when they go on to I was always very well. I wasn't a sickly person. I didn't have any chronic diseases. I was a top athlete and played professionally. I was an All-American, like all these sorts of things. And I ate a clean omnivorous diet. And then when I went to only eating meat, I felt like I was a superhuman, and in ways I was, because my body was working in ways that were super physiological, that other people's body did not work, that my body didn't do previously. And so, I took the anchor off. So everyone's going to do better. Everyone's going to feel a lot better. Other people that can do just fine compared to other people eating a mixed diet, sure. The people that broadly will do better on a mixed omnivorous diet would be people that have descended from the earliest iterations of agriculture. We had the agricultural revolution about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, and before that, it wasn't just like overnight we just started hoeing corn. It was people were sort of gathering and grabbing things, and then sort of saying, hey, we could actually plant these things. That's a hell of a lot easier than just looking for them. And so these peoples were hunter gatherers, and the gathering part was a. If you look at hunter gatherers now, you look at the Hadza, they start hunting first, and if they don't get a kill, Then they start gathering and they start looking at other options. But, meat is what they're predominantly looking for. And then they'll grab other stuff if they have to. And and there's certain populations that after the mass extinction of the megafauna, they didn't have access to other big animals that they could eat in abundance, and they had to start doing more of the gathering side of things. Like the Native Americans, the Cheyenne, and other sorts of people in the Great Plains, they were still just living off buffalo, and they just ate bison meat, high fat too. People say, well, the wild animals are really lean. No, the muscle bodies are lean because they don't have myosteatosis, that intramuscular fat. But the subcutaneous fat, they have plenty because they were healthy. If they were a healthy animal, they had fat on them. That was the sign of healthy, was it had a bit of fat on it, not obese, but had a healthy amount of fat. They weren't sickly and starving. And they would take that fat, they would render it, and they'd mix it with dried, crushed up meat, and at a 1-to-1 ratio. And that was pemmican. That actually had 2 grams of fat to every 1 gram of protein. So that was 80% calories from fat. So it's actually very, very high fat. So people ate very high fat because we needed to. We do require more fat. And that's the thing too. You look at the different genetic populations, people say like, well, how can we be carnivores? We make amylase, and amylase breaks down starches. But when did we start making amylase? About 10,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture. That's when it really swept through the different populations. Lactase persistence as well. That came about 10, 15,000 years ago when we didn't have these fatty ruminant animals, and we had to go for the next biggest animal around, like big bovine creatures, and then we started cultivating them for dairy. And we used to, again, up until the mid 1900s, skim milk. When we started saying fat's bad, or late 1900s, when you're saying fat's bad, skim milk was a throwaway product, right? And we wanted the fat. The fat was really important, yeah. And so fed it to pigs, fatten them up, and then get more fat. And so those populations that have ancestry, that have had longer exposure, and we've had some ability to adapt to those plant toxins, they'll do better. But there are plenty of Caucasians and Europeans that get horribly sick and horrible autoimmune diseases and things like that from eating a mixed diet. They really can't handle it. But different populations that have come to agriculture much more recently, like the Native Australians and the Native Americans, especially in the Great Plains, the Inuit, the Maasai, they do much worse. When I was a kid in California, I saw a news story that my parents were listening to that said when Native Americans were eating a Western diet, they were 4 times as likely to get chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, cancer, etc. I remember thinking at the time, well, doesn't that mean that the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And we eat the food and we get the disease just at a lower rate. And what's a non-Western diet? Like, what are they eating that we're not, and vice versa? Well, they were carnivores.
Pacific Islanders also. Now, how would you look at somebody who came from a culture that predominantly ate fish, like an island nation, compared with somebody from the Caucasus? Obviously there's or Native Americans where they were living off buffalo. Is there a level to which they've evolved a more fish-based biology? I mean, and that they're better capable of processing and needing fish as opposed to beef?
Well, I mean, fish are still carnivore. You're still going to get all those nutrients, and they're very healthy. Different Native American populations had different food sources. In fact, it was interesting. I saw this article. It was talking about, from an economic point of view, what was the most wealthy civilization that has ever existed. And if you look at the wealth of a civilization as a product of their leisure time, as how much time they have to spend out of their day to go about the necessary things for life, the working, the getting food, and this and this and this, and how much of the time they just get to hang out and do whatever the hell they want, right? This is what they say that agriculture was so great, because it gave people leisure time. You could sit in a city and you could think big thoughts, and you could get your Aristotles and Plato's and things like that. Well, in fact, think about it. You have the Native Americans with the buffalo. They do a buffalo drop once a year. The herds come through. They do one big hunt a year, and then they're processing this meat for a couple of weeks. Then their time is their own, right? But the wealthiest population from that standpoint, the civilization that ever seen from that standpoint, were Native Americans in the Columbia River Basin in Washington State. And they had this, the Columbia River is a massive river that had a huge salmon run. And they had these massive weirs and nets out into the Columbia River. And they're just catching just tons of fish all day, every day. And so, once those things were set up, all they had to do was walk out there and just grab all their food. They had no expenditure of time on anything except they just did whatever the hell they want when they wanted. So, they certainly could have come up with all sorts of advanced mathematics if they wanted to, and had cities and all that sort of stuff. So I think that we're all fully capable of thriving on fish or terrestrial creatures. Some people would argue actually that people congregate towards or around water largely because we're trying to get some of those nutrients, those fish and things like that, and that actually was a large part of it. Now we know that there were populations that thrived on mammoth and buffalo and all these sorts of things, but some people argue that they also ate fish, and that was an important part too. So who knows? But I think you can do just fine on either. There's an argument now that the seas are so polluted and you have all these heavy metals and mercuries and things like that. And especially as you go up the food chain with fish, you can get a higher concentration of these heavy metals. Some people argue that that's not really as bad as people make it out to be either. Who knows? But I think that if you just have healthy, nice, natural fish, I think you could eat that your entire life and be perfectly fine. I don't think you have to eat another fish again as long as you live if you're eating healthy meat of another source either. I think they're interchangeable. I think they're both great.
When it comes to starting a carnivore diet, if somebody's kind of on that process, on that thought mindset, and they're saying, okay, well, I'm thinking about this. What are kind of the first steps in creating that shift? Is it something you do like instantly, or is there like a good way to slowly inch into it? I've utilized it with a couple of my patients and had really phenomenal results for them because like it's such a powerful diet. I'd love to get your take on what's a good journey into this type of, I think it's more of a lifestyle than a diet, honestly.
Definitely. Well, yeah, it is. And that's the thing. A diet suggested something temporary, that you just do this for a little bit and then you go away. Well, you're not going to avoid lead temporarily anyway. It's just like, well, get rid of the lead poisoning, but then I'm going back, because and then people ask me too, how, with autoimmunity and things like that, like, okay, well now my autoimmunity is in remission. How long do I have to do this before I can go back to eating other ways? I was like, I don't know. When do you want to get Crohn's disease again? That's pretty much it.
And we can arrange it.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's just like, well, when can I go back to, drinking leaded water? Well, it's exactly when you want to get lead poisoning again. That's when you do it. And so it depends on the individual. Some people just really can't get their head around. They're like, I don't think I can do that in one go. It's too much for them. And so, doing that in a gradual pattern, I think is perfectly fine. But I think you really have to map it out. And you have to say, like, you have a set point. Okay, on Friday, you're cutting out processed food. That's it. You're cooking every meal from scratch. It's whole foods, right? And then the next Friday, you're cutting out carbohydrates, sugars, carbs. You're just ketogenic, and you're always adding in more fatty meat. You're getting used to eating more fatty meat, and that's the main focus of your meal. And you can have some other things to fill in the sides, but that's where you start with. And then you eat that until you're full, and then you can eat some of the other stuff too. And the next week, you're cutting out nightshades, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. Those say, okay, and then beans, seeds, legumes, nuts, all that sort of stuff. And then you just cut out everything else. Okay, so after 4 weeks of this, you're sort of cutting it down and down and down and down. You have a day where it's like, on this day, that's it. I'm just 100% fatty meat. I think that works for some people. The majority of people, I think, do best with cold turkey. When you strike while the iron's hot, they're motivated. They're like, yeah, I think I can do this. Just do it. Go home, throw out everything out of your pantry and your refrigerator, give it to people that you don't mind seeing poisoned, and just give it to them, and just get it out of your house, because when you're quitting smoking, people quit smoking for 20 years. Because, oh yeah, I'm quitting. I'm trying to quit. And it's like, okay, so I'm going to cut down. Oh, but I just bought another pack. I can't stop now. Oh, okay. My grandma gave me a carton. Okay. I'll finish that. There's always more, right? At some point you just need to stop. And so I think when you first sort of make that decision, that's when you're most highly motivated. That's when you do it. You just strike while the iron's hot. And then get everything out of the house, because if you're trying to quit smoking, you don't want packs of cigarettes laying around. And so if you're trying to quit carbs and sugar and all that sort of junk, you need to get that out of the house. I see this, in my own parents, they just had things in the house. I'm like, hey, I think you should really get rid of this stuff. And they got rid of a lot of it. But I want to keep some of this around just in case other people come in. And so sure enough, there's just sort of stuff there. And then they're just sort of bored. So they just start snacking on almonds and this and that. I'm like, guys, what are we talking about? And they don't even realize it. Oh, God, I didn't even realize it because it's just second nature. And so you get it out of there, get it out of the way. That can be more difficult when you have one person in the household that's doing it and everybody else is like, you're freaking crazy. We'll wait and see if you die of a heart attack and then we might think about it. And, but if you can do that, get rid of it. And I find that, once you get through that, you get through the first sort of 2 weeks, that's where most of the teething issues come. Some people do fine. I mean, I just felt better and better and better every single day. But then after about 2 weeks, you get most of the junk out of your system. The carb cravings are typically gone. You're not really missing sugar as long as you're eating enough. If you're under eating, you get a lot of cravings. And so you're craving food, eat. But eat food, eat real food, eat meat. And but after about 2 weeks, it usually goes away, and then you just feel better and better and better. And so, if you give someone and say, look, why don't you just try it for 30 days, see how you do, but do it full on for 30 days, and just see how you feel. And if you want, after that, you can go away from it. And some people, that's easier to wrap their heads around, like, okay, I can do this for 30 days. It's not a big deal. And I can go back to eating, whatever the hell I want to afterwards. They almost never do because they see how much better that they feel. And then they say like, oh, okay, well, I'll have some ice cream, I'll have some pizza or something like that. And then they just feel wretched.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my, I didn't realize how good I felt until it just left.
I've found that myself. I'll tell you, I haven't cut, the only carbohydrate that I have is I will have rice, a small amount of rice every once in a while. And I have, as of over the last month or so, maybe even 2 months, I found that on nights that I have a little bit of rice with my steak or with the fish I've cooked, or within about an hour, I can't keep my eyes open. I literally will just put my head down on the side of the couch and just fall asleep for an hour. And I'm thinking to myself, that's almost like a toxic response. I mean, it's like an insulin shock coma or something I'm going into. So I've just got to, just get rid of it. I guess the one thing that's scary to people is the fact that it feels like you're excluding so many of the things that people like to eat. And food is such a big part of social gatherings, and it's such a big part of our relationship with other people that it becomes sort of difficult, almost antisocial, to decide, listen, I'm only eating one thing, or I'm only going to eat a small number of things that when I'm out to dinner, they bring you steak and the fixins, and you're just saying, nope, I'm just going to have the steak and no fixins. And everybody else is like, well, let's get the Lyonnaise potatoes, and let's get the and why won't you have like onions and mushrooms with it or something? How does that work for you socially?
Yeah, at first you might feel a bit awkward, but then you realize that no one really cares. I mean, if you think back to the last time you went out to dinner with friends, the most recent time you went out to dinner with friends, can you remember anything that anybody ordered and how much of what they ate? Probably not.
We went to a steakhouse, so it was pretty easy at that point.
But that's the thing is that that's easy. But, did other people order a potato or this or that? How much of that potato did they eat? Did they get, the veggies on the side? Did they get the this or did they get the that? It was like, well, maybe kind of. And how much of that did they eat? The odds are you're not going to pay attention. And especially if you go to, another restaurant, they just, probably not going to care. There's always meat on the menu. You can order whatever you like. You can always order a steak. You can order the fish. You can order the whatever. And eat whatever you want. What draws attention is your own sort of insecurity and concern that other people are going to be concerned.
But what about when you go to somebody else's house? What about if you go into somebody else's house, and they've prepared something,
Yeah. Well, the thing is that people cater to vegetarians and vegans all the time, and a vegan's not going to go there and eat suckling pig just because you made it, they're going to call you a murderer and pour bleach on your car, and so it's, people accommodate, everybody of all these sorts of different things. And you can say different things like, oh, my doctor has me on a ketogenic diet. It's for my diabetes, it's for this or that, whatever. You can just say that. You call it a ketogenic diet. It is a ketogenic diet, and so you can say that. It's becoming more, I don't know if mainstream is the right word, but at least people understand what the hell it is and why people are doing it. And so you can just say, yeah, I'm trying this whole carnivore thing. Most people are like, oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, my brother's doing that. Yeah, sure. Whatever. Most people don't really mind. The problem you get when people start wondering why you're not eating what they're eating, that kind of speaks to like sort of more of an addiction side of things. When you're saying, hey, why aren't you drinking? Why aren't you doing that? They feel bad. Now you're making them feel awkward that, hey, I shouldn't have to feel awkward that I'm drinking. Drinking's okay. Drinking's fine. Why aren't you drinking? There's nothing wrong with drinking. Well, there's nothing wrong with my potatoes and my this and my that. Well, why the hell aren't you doing it? That sort of speaks more to them than it does to you. And most people don't care, and now obviously it's everyone knows what I eat. So it's like, I go over, and everyone's just like, even if they don't eat that way, they know what I eat, and so, we have something like I'll have the meat from it and, just leave the rest more for them. That's fine. But I find that, I'll put it to you this way. When I first did this in my early 20s, I wasn't doing a diet. I just wouldn't eat plants. And so I just analyzed things and said, okay, that's that, and that. Okay, I can eat that and that and that. So I'd pick those things out. I never brought attention to it. I never said, I'm doing this. I never felt self-conscious and said, oh, I'm doing this because, and oh, this is what I should do, whatever. And because that's what draws attention to you. And then people are like, well, why the hell are you doing that? Wait, hold on. You don't eat any of that. Wait, hold on a second. That's when the questions come. And that's when it starts getting awkward. For 5 full years, I didn't say anything about it. And no one else did either. I can't remember a single time that any person said anything about the way I ate. I can't remember a single time because I never spoke about it. I never talked about it. I never said anything about it. I just ate the way I ate and I just shut up and got on with it and no one noticed. So if you just do your thing, then no one's really going to notice. If you're not concerned about it, no one else is going to be.
I love that. I think that's so important for people to hear because I think truly it comes from our own insecurities about what are they going to think? What are other people going to say when I tell them that this is what I'm eating? That it creates this internal angst, and it actually is incredibly disadvantageous to us, to ourselves, to actually say, like, I'm worried about what other people are going to say about the type of food that I'm eating.
They don't. They don't ask. They don't care. People. I try to tell my kids that too about social pressure. Like, most people just don't care. They're just not going to, they're more self-absorbed. They're not going to focus on what you're doing. Let me ask you, as a good scientist, you want to measure things. What type of biomarkers are you keeping track of it for yourself?
I infrequently take blood, but I do take my bloods. I will do the standard, panels of bloods and, renal function, liver function, things like that. I look for metabolic markers, fasting insulin, HbA1c. I'll look at my various hormones, testosterone, IGF-1 for growth hormone, thyroid function. I'll look at the different nutrients as well. So B12, folate, vitamin D, erythrocyte levels of zinc and magnesium, because those are more accurate than serum levels. And for myself, that would probably be it. Iodine, I checked that recently. And that would be pretty much it for me. And then obviously in my patients, I would check a similar constellation of things, but I would also obviously check whatever's pertinent to that particular patient. I find that when I put people on these diets, that they massively improve their metabolic health and their hormonal health as well. I have people literally aging backwards. I have, patients that have, what we would consider normal aging, depletion of their hormones. A 72-year-old man that has, 1/3 the normal level of testosterone for a healthy 25-year-old man. And that's normal. He's 72. He's not a 25-year-old man. But you put him on a carnivore diet 4 months later, it triples. And now he all of a sudden has an optimal level of testosterone for a healthy 25-year-old man, not the 25-year-old men running around now. They're not optimal. We have the lowest levels of testosterone in human history. There's an interesting, there's a funny title to a study that came out in 2001 that said, "You are not half the man your grandfather was." And it looked at the testosterone levels of men in their 20s in the early 2000s and found that was half of the testosterone levels of 60-year-old men back in the 70s, right?
And so sperm counts are down.
Sperm counts are down. Fertility's down. Yeah.
And
PCOS is up.
I can't tell if it's tongue in cheek or not, but they're saying that the level of testosterone also correlates with your voting record.
I've heard that.
Which
Yeah.
direction you're voting, which,
I heard that. Yeah.
I'm not sure
Well,
if that's tongue in cheek or not, but
no, I haven't seen the study myself, but I've seen people talk about. Apparently, there was a study that was done where they took a lot of people, men that were all different descriptions, and the more left-leaning individual males had significantly lower testosterone, and then they gave them injections of testosterone, and then asked them the same sort of questions, and they all switched their answers to a more conservative sort of right-wing answer, which is funny too. There was an article that came out, was it MSNBC? I think it was MSNBC. Couple of years ago that said exercise has a strong correlation with the far right extremists. So just stop working out. It's like everything's just like, don't be healthy, don't eat right, yeah, and don't exercise. It's just like, Jesus. You just want these weak, effeminate, cowed individuals that just do what they're told. It's like, yeah, well, okay. So if thinking for yourself and wanting the freedoms that the Constitution promises us is a far right extremist, fine. But you can call somebody anything you want, but it doesn't make it true. And it is interesting about that, the testosterone level. I haven't seen that study, but I've seen people talk about it. But I see it's massively different. I mean, I have clients that are patients really that are professional athletes, and they, as professional athletes, already have a decent level of testosterone, and they will double their testosterone as a professional athlete. I mean, what's that doing to you? A lot of people, cheat and risk their health and their livelihoods and their future career by manipulating their testosterone to get a double what it is. Their bodies are just doing it for them. And then all their other hormones and everything else is coming up at the same time. And it's a massive, massive benefit. I've had women in their mid 50s that went through menopause in their late 40s that had a return of their cycle and started producing estrogen again. I've had 6 ladies that have done that so far, had a return of their cycle. And every other lady that I talked to about that, they're, oh, no, God, I don't want that. I'm done with that bullshit, but but it's a clear sign that they're aging backwards, that they're improving their metabolic health, that their hormonal health and metabolic health is now going backwards. And I had a PCOS. I mean, this is one of the many things that insulin does and deranges is that it blocks the conversion of testosterone and estrogen in the ovaries of women. So you get PCOS, you get too much testosterone, not enough estrogen. You also get early menopause. And I had a lady who was basically PCOS and early menopause. She was getting infrequent periods. Her estrogen was barely detectable. It was like, here in Australia, they don't do high sensitivity estrogen. So they can't detect anything under 85, right? So she had 88, right? And then 3 months on a ketogenic carnivore diet, all of a sudden her cycle returned, it became regular, and her estrogen was 650 and her LH and FSH were normal now. And her IGF-1, which is a marker of growth hormone production, tripled. Her growth hormone should be, or your IGF-1 for a 25-year-old woman should be between 28 and 38 for the units here in Australia. Hers were 12, and she's only 30, 38, 39. So, that's not that old, but she was metabolically very unwell. After doing this, after 4 months on a carnivore diet, it was now 34. So she's at the healthy, optimal range for a 25-year-old woman. So that's a big deal. There are people that say that they think IGF-1 is like this big boogeyman or monster. Like, absolutely not. I mean, this is a hormone. It's like I think of it sort of almost like a fountain of youth. I mean, this stuff, it helps with the building and repair of your tissue. And again, you have this interplay of breakdown and repair. And if you're breaking down but you're not repairing, you're aging and you're getting more breakdown of your tissue. And IGF-1 helps with the repair. Now, you go super physiological. Sure, that's going to cause serious problems. But if you stay in that range of when you're a 25-year-old, when most of us were as healthy as we would ever be, except if they go carnivore, then they're even healthier. But when you get back to that optimal level, why would that all of a sudden be a problem? They say that IGF-1 can cause cancer because there's a growth hormone. So it's going to make things grow, and cancer grows. Therefore, growth hormone will cause cancer. Well, then why is it that people with gigantism and acromegaly have no increased incidence of cancer versus the rest of the population?
That's a fallacious argument. We talk a lot about epigenetics, and we talk about, and there's the information theory of aging, and which I find very interesting because you've got this balance between anabolism and catabolism. And so, there is a very positive benefit associated with autophagy, and a very, and obviously you need to have activated mTOR in order to grow. So IGF-1 and mTOR go sort of hand in hand. Intermittent fasting, I realize I'm sort of throwing a bunch of things out all at once, but intermittent fasting helps to trigger that autophagy that's helpful for clearing out misfolded proteins and portions of organelles that have become dysfunctional. And, it's sort of the spring cleaning and recycling combined. Where does intermittent fasting or fasting fit into the carnivore diet? And do you do that? And then as a separate, not related question, I was going to say, are there any supplements that you're taking that you found you needed? My suspicion is the answer is no, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. Are there any supplements that you take either because of something that's deficient or because you think that it's better to enhance it?
Yeah. So when you're eating high density nutrition, you don't need to eat as much or as often. So most people, when they're eating a very healthy, high fat carnivorous diet, they typically find they don't need to eat more than once a day. I will often eat once a day, and that's how I feel best. And as long as I'm getting enough, and I eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, until my body is telling me, yes, that's enough. As long as I do that, and there's enough fat, a sufficient amount of fat in there, then I typically don't feel hungry for another 24 hours. If I'm working out heavily and I'm lifting weights or playing rugby or something like that, my body needs more energy. It needs more nutrients to put on muscle, etc. Then usually twice a day, my body will want to eat. And if I can do that, I will put on muscle extremely easily. But I don't consider it fasting because I'm not intentionally withholding food when I'm hungry. I'm just eating when I'm hungry. And it happens to be that I'm not hungry more than once a day. But it does turn out to be in that OMAD, 1 meal a day, intermittent fasting sort of window that we would see. So you sort of automatically fall into that sort of pattern. But I think a major part of that is when we are ketogenic. That's one of the many benefits of having normal insulin is that high insulin blocks autophagy. And so if you're just in a ketogenic state the whole time, then you're going to keep your insulin high, especially if you're doing like 1 meal a day. You're going to get a bit of a bump in your insulin from protein, but it's not that much, and you don't really get anything from fat. But then you do that once a day, and it sort of flattens out, and you really just have very, very low normal insulin the rest of the time. You're going through autophagy. And so, I found studies that looked at just ketogenic diets in general, and they found that because of these effects of keeping the insulin low and allowing you to go through autophagy, mitophagy, mitogenesis, that you typically have about 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective after several months on a ketogenic diet and without fasting. And you'll see a massive amount of studies in the literature looking at so-called fasting mimicking diets because they say, well, fasting has all these benefits, and there's thousands of studies showing the benefits of fasting.
Every culture's involved it.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. All cultures have this, religious groups, all these sorts of things. It revolves around fasting, and there's all these different benefits that are contained within that. But so we have all these studies that show that fasting is very beneficial. And, specifically having mouse models is interesting. They fasted them for as little as 4 days a month, and you're able to actually reverse not only type 2 diabetes, but type 1 diabetes. They're able to re-stimulate the growth of the beta islet cells in the pancreas and start making insulin again. Super interesting. So I said, okay, well, that's really difficult. Even just fasting 4 days out of the month is difficult for people to do. So,
and for a mouse, 4 days is the equivalent of like a whole month. I mean, that's like
Well, I think it didn't say. Well, I think when they were
converting,
it might have been that like a equivalent, like a 4 day equivalent or something like that. But yeah, you're right. And they look at, it's like, okay, well, would a fasting mimicking diet be the same? Because it's difficult to fast. It's difficult to, take all that much time off food. So would a diet that would put you in the metabolic state that you would be in when you're fasting, would that have the same benefit? And a lot of these things find out that yes, you do have the same benefit from a fasting mimicking diet, which is a ketogenic diet, because a ketogenic diet is sort of a 4-letter word in a lot of academic circles. And so they have to hide it behind fasting mimicking. And so you may not find studies, you'll find a lot of studies on ketogenic, but you might find even more if you look for other sort of terms like fasting mimicking. And they find sometimes if you fast for a certain period of time, if you're not getting at least 100 grams of protein a day, you can lose hair, you can have other sorts of side effects, and even just 100 grams of protein a day, you'll not have those side effects. And doing the ketogenic diets instead of that, you tend to not have those side effects either. So I think that a lot of the benefits you get from fasting come from just not eating the wrong thing and also being in a ketogenic state. I don't think that ketogenic state is a fasting state. I don't think that's our alternate state. I think that's our primary metabolic state. That's where our heavy machinery comes to bear. That's where a lot of these processes turn on and your insulin comes down to normal and you allow all these physiological processes to run normally. And like you said, I think autophagy is just your normal housekeeping. That's what your body is supposed to be doing all the time, not just you just are in a famine and you're in a siege and you just starve yourself for a few days. Oh, thank God, because you would have gotten cancer otherwise. Like, no, your body's better than that. It's smarter than that. It's going to try to keep everything working ship shape all the time. And so I think that's our main metabolic state. I think that's our primary metabolic state. That's the metabolic state of most animals in nature, carnivores and herbivores, because they get the majority of their calories from fat and protein. Lions have been found to be in ketosis. Wolves are found to be in ketosis. Cows and gorillas, although they eat these fibrous plants, that fiber is glucose, but they don't break down the glucose. No animal, not even termites, actually make cellulase to break down cellulose. Termites have protozoa and cows have bacteria that will eat the fiber. And as a byproduct, they'll create saturated fat, short-chain fatty acids. Yeah. And then those bacterial protozoa will die off and they'll absorb those as protein. So what the cow and the gorilla eat are plants, but what they absorb is 70 to 80% calories from fat, and most of the rest from protein. So they're all on a ketogenic diet as well until they get put into the feedlot, and then you put them on a whole bunch of carbs and grains and things like that, and then they start getting a whole bunch of insulin and start storing fat, and
they become diabetic.
All the rest of it itself, and become diabetic. That's it. And they don't care because they're like, all right, well, we're gonna take them to slaughter. It doesn't matter if they're healthy or not, but they're not. They're not healthy. And so, yeah, I think the majority of the benefit comes from being in the correct metabolic state. I think we get a lot of benefit from that.
I think that's one of the fundamental things about health. I mean, there's really only 4 pillars of health. Your mitochondrial health, your metabolic health, your immune health, your microbiome and how your microbiome's functioning, and then it's your autonomic nervous system. We haven't talked a lot about that, but we typically do on this podcast about the autonomic nervous system. But I agree with you. I think that ultimately the ketogenic state is our natural state, and every time we're out of that, we're actually risking damage to whether it be the epigenome or to the mitochondrial function or even to our microbiome.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that all that comes together. I think all roads lead to Rome. When you are eating what you're biologically designed to eat, you should see improvements in all of these directions. And that's exactly what you see. I know so many people have come to a carnivore diet because their particular niche has taken them there, that this is the best way to approach it. So I did from a biological, botanical point of view that just, plants are toxic. Plants have these toxins we're not biologically capable of dealing with, most of them. And, we can deal with a lot of them to a large degree, but low-grade exposure to toxins over time lead to problems. And so, I don't want that. And so I stay away from that. And that brought me here. And then I started looking at other pieces of evidence. But then other people came to it from other points of view. I have a friend, Dr. Sean O'Mara, who's an ER physician, super interesting guy. He was like Dick Cheney's personal doctor. He was in the military, won this award for being like the best doctor in the armed services. And that was when Dick Cheney started having heart attacks in office. And they're like, okay, you're the best. You're coming with us, And so he was his personal doctor for that time and after he was in office. And he went into nutritional research And he's looking at visceral fat, and he found how it's metabolically active. It can, cause all sorts of different problems. And he was like, okay, well, how the hell do we get rid of this stuff? And it's associated with all these different metabolic diseases. And he found that a carnivore diet was the best dietary approach to get rid of visceral fat. And then he has other approaches as well, sprinting, weightlifting, different sorts of things as well. But from a diet perspective, he found that the carnivore diet was the best. There's a Professor Laszlo Boros, who's an expert in deuterium. He's a professor emeritus at UCLA School of Medicine, and he is looking at deuterium as heavy hydrogen, and you need some of this. If you get too much of this, it can actually cause serious problems metabolically. It actually can directly damage your mitochondria. When you get deuterium, they can't go through the hydrogen transporters into the mitochondria. Deuterium is a proton and a neutron. So normally hydrogen is just a proton. So this is literally double. It's the largest difference in isotope difference in the known chemistry. And so that really damages these little rotors going into the mitochondria. So it destroys these mitochondria and causes all these different sorts of problems. And so he found that a ketogenic carnivore diet actually gives you the perfect levels of deuterium. So he's like, right. So this is, a professor of medicine from UCLA has this big biochemistry lab there. And now it's just full-time studying deuterium, and he is carnivore because that's the best diet for keeping your deuterium levels correct. And I've come across experts in the microbiome that say we love carnivore because it gives you the best microbiome. So it's like everything is just coming to this point where it's just from every direction that you look at, all these different experts in all these different fields are saying this is the best thing to help human health in this way. And it's all converging, which makes sense if this is indeed our biologically appropriate diet, which I think it is. I think all the evidence really points to that.
I had a very specific case with a client of mine who's an elite CrossFitter, and he was toying with going on carnivore, and we decided, okay, let's do some stool testing, understand what's going on with your microbiome at the beginning, do 6 months, and see what's happening afterwards. The biggest change that we saw, we had obviously improvements in his commensal and keystone bacteria into an optimal range for the majority of them. The biggest change we noticed, and this was because we often think, fiber, short chain fatty acids, butyrate, it's going to go up. He went full carnivore for 6 months. His butyrate went from the 13th percentile to the 100th percentile, literally went up so high. I was in shock because this was the first real experience that I had where we saw a before and after shift in butyrate levels, which we were assuming was purely coming from a fiber intake, right? And carnivore allowed that major shift to happen. So I just thought that was a really interesting thing, and it showed major changes in just even microbiome composition. So
yeah,
really cool
it
finding.
is really interesting. And I think, some people use ferments. I know my friend, Sean O'Mara really likes the ferment sort of things. Like you won't eat any plants. You just like a bit of fermented stuff just to get the bacteria. It's almost like a supplement. But I've seen people go carnivore, even from like a clean keto diet with fiber and all that sort of stuff, but just whole foods all the way. And they're like Benazati. He's actually down in Florida, and he's been doing keto for a long time. He has a big channel, has something called Keto Camp. And so he's been very clean keto, very healthy for a very long time. And he checked his microbiome, and he said it was good. It wasn't great from long-term keto. And the recommendation was, cut out red meat, eat less of that, eat less fat, eat a whole bunch of more fruits and vegetables and fiber and all that sort of stuff, because that's what we are told that's going to improve your microbiome. So he said he did the exact opposite of that. He cut out all the fiber, all the plants, and only ate red meat for 3 months and checked his microbiome again, and it came back stellar. It was far better than it was before. It basically hit perfect on everything. And he actually had 6 new bacterial lines that were all beneficial that hadn't existed before. So it was like, where the hell do those come from? I think that comes from our oral biome. Our oral biome is going to change as well, depending on what we eat. And, one of the things you're chewing up these fermented foods, you're chewing up with this bolus of food and you swallow it. Well, you're doing that with your oral biome too. The bacteria in your mouth are going to get into the food that you're eating. A lot of that's going to get burned up in your stomach acid. But if you're chewing up this bolus of food, you're going to stuff some of that bacteria way deep down there like a Trojan horse. And, maybe some of that gets through. I don't know where else these things are coming from.
Probably also probably also your airway microbiome, your respiratory microbiome, because that's constantly in communication going right down into your digestive tract. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
absolutely.
What about the glucose ketone index? Do you keep track of your GKI?
I don't for myself, but I do recommend it for patients with cancer. Absolutely.
And you want to
And
get that
so,
down under 2?
yeah, under 2. Yeah, under 2 is therapeutic and under 1 is ideal. And so, and that would be a case where I would say fasting could be a benefit. If you're really having trouble, strict ketogenic carnivore diet, 2 to 1 grams of fat to protein, most people can keep their GKI under 2, especially with intermittent fasting, eating once a day, maybe, eating 6 days a week, just having 1 day off or something like that. Most people will be able to do that. Some can't. And so if you're in that category and you just need to, sometimes that's the other thing too, is a lot of these studies on ketogenic metabolic therapy for cancer have shown, all of them have shown that it's calorie restricted ketogenic diets always do best. And so when you're sort of eating a little bit less and again, restricting a bit more of this energy and not getting as much of an insulin blood sugar bump after you eat, things like that, probably seems to do better. So if you are doing that, and there's a group called Paleomedicina in Hungary, and they've been treating cancer with this approach, with a hardcore carnivore diet for a good 15 years now. And they have exemplary results. They have some of their case reports in the published literature, but they found that people are just, they're not accepting their studies and their case reports. They can't really publish their literature, which is a bit bullshit, really, because they have absolutely amazing results. So what they found is they don't use any fasting. They decided they don't really like that. But it's definitely calorie restricted. And so when you're doing this sort of restriction, you're not getting as much food as you necessarily need. You still need the same amount of nutrients. And so they add in organs. So everybody's eating a bit of organs every single day, sort of 100 grams of liver, 100 grams of kidney, things like that. And but you're restricting. Otherwise, you're eating less than your body necessarily needs. And this seems to do pretty well. And that can keep your GKI down as well. If you're restricting basically on your daily meals, or you're restricting by fasting for periods of time in order to keep your average GKI below 2 or below 1, at some point you're going to need to refeed, because you do still need food. And maybe people are overweight, they have a bit of a buffer and cushion. You're going to need organs because you still need the same amount of nutrients. But there will be a point when you lose your excess fat and you start losing lean body mass if you keep under eating, especially if you're going through chemo, radiation, things like that. And so it is very important that if you're doing this, you need to have periods of refeeding so that you're not losing too much weight. And so on those days, your GKI probably is not going to be under 2. And that's okay, but for the average for the week, if it's under 2, I think that's fine. So if the majority of the time you're doing this, this idea of that Professor Seyfried has this sort of press pulse sort of approach where you have the constant pressure of a ketogenic diet. You're really not bringing carbohydrates into your body, because the people that don't know cancer cells, it's called the Warburg effect, require roughly 400 times the amount of glucose as normal cells, because their mitochondria are damaged. They can't go through oxidative phosphorylation. And so they have to go through substrate level fermentation, and it's just much less efficient. They need much more glucose to get the same amount of ATP, and they have a much higher metabolic demand because it's just constantly dividing, that they need a lot more glucose. And if they don't meet those metabolic demands, they die.
Right.
And
the pulse
that's what we want.
And the pulse is the medications that block glutamine synthesis.
Glutamine. Yeah. And or hardcore fat, you just don't eat for 5 days or something like that, and then your GKI goes really low, and you're really restricting that. And one of the added benefits of fasting for cancer is that glutamine is ubiquitous. We make it, so we also make glucose, but it's also ubiquitous in the food we eat. So it's in plants, it's in meat. It does denature when you cook it. So you could just think about that, maybe eat things more well done. But also if you're fasting, you're not getting any glutamine, and you're not getting any carbohydrates, and you're definitely not getting any blood sugar swings, because nothing's coming in. And so I think that could be an added benefit of fasting from a cancer perspective as well.
For sure. The issue with glutamine is really sort of fascinating, because the idea that cells could use an amino acid as a fuel it's not that difficult to think about if you think about the fact that when you starve yourself, your body will turn to muscle as a source of fuel. It's just interesting to see how that pulse method, coupled with hyperbaric oxygen, is so potent. It's like that's the period of time you can almost, the patients say they can actually feel the cancer cells just bursting inside me. So his theories are very interesting. It sounds like you've spent a fair amount of time looking into it and utilizing it for your own patients.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, I was actually a co-author on his most recent paper looking at doing ketogenic metabolic therapy for GBM, glioblastoma. And so this is something that I, implemented with my own patients a number of times. Now, I was working in neurosurgery. I've since stopped. I have my own practice in sort of metabolic health, functional medicine. Just took over for a friend who had to sort of forced into retirement, unfortunately, and needed somebody to help out with his patients. So I've sort of taken a break from neurosurgery and just doing that. But I still have patients that know that this is something that that I think is beneficial, and they come to me with GBM and other cancers and things like that to help them from the diet perspective, from the ketogenic metabolic therapy perspective, and then they do everything that they want to do with their surgeons and their oncologists as well. I just help out with just keeping their body as healthy as possible and doing the KMT with them as well. So this is something that I've seen be very beneficial to people. I've obviously interviewed several long-term survivors with GBM, which is a very, very serious disease. And so you have these people that are gone 10 years and have no sign of disease now because they've stayed very strict. And then unfortunately, a friend of mine, Pablo Kelly, who's about a 10-year survivor with GBM, he sort of was a bit more slack, and he had a bit of a sort of a moment where he's like, I should be able to have ice cream with my kids. I should be able to do this. I should be able to do that. And all of a sudden, this thing started growing again. And he started having neurological issues, got an MRI. He's like, oh God, this thing's growing again. And then he's realized pretty quickly, okay, I should is not in my dictionary anymore. It's like, I can't do that. Whether I should or shouldn't be able to do it, I can't. And unfortunately, he went back in for a debulking, but unfortunately, from what I could glean from the internet, he actually didn't survive the surgery, unfortunately, which is very, very sad. Yeah. But at the same time, he lived a solid 9 years longer than he was
married,
expected
had
to.
children. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Do a lot of things. Let me ask you about endurance exercise while on the ketogenic diet and what the effect is with your liver. Because when you exert yourself, if I go and I run 8-10 miles in a fasted state, because I always run, first thing in the morning. So when I leave this interview, which is morning for us, I'm going to the gym and I'm going to run 8 miles. In that fasted state, what is my liver doing? Is it generating glucose for that run, or is it, am I now living on ketones for that run? What's happening? And how does that affect the glucose ketone index?
You'll be running on both. So you'll make glucose, you'll make glycogen, and you'll also be making ketones. But the majority of the energy you'll be using is through fat oxidation. So I believe it was McSweeney published in 2018 a study with high performance endurance athletes, ultra marathoners, Ironman runners, and things like that, like elite world class level guys, right? And some of them had just been doing keto for average of 20, 22 months, something like that. Shortest was 9 months, longest was 36 months. And they compared that to a group of, world-class ultra marathoners and Ironman runners that were not ketogenic. And they found that they tried them on all these different sorts of things. And they actually found that, I remember it was Volek. I think it was either McSweeney or the Volek trial anyways. But they found, the McSweeney one anyway, tested them against, for 3 different trials of a 100-mile run, and then a short 6-second maximal sprint and another high-intensity exercise. And they found that the ketogenic athletes actually outperformed the carb athletes. For the 2 high-intensity ones where it came to statistical significance, the 100-mile run didn't reach statistical significance, but everybody did actually beat the carb athletes. The interesting thing about that is that they got these guys to agree to a muscle biopsy before and after the 100-mile run. So they had this muscle biopsy in their leg before the run, and they said that for 100 miles, it felt like every step they took, someone was stabbing them in the leg with a pen, and it was just like, God, the whole for 100 miles, and then they took biopsy before, directly after, and then was it 3 hours after? So the carb athletes were just sucking down gels and carbs and sugar and Gatorade and all that sort of garbage, and the keto athletes weren't. They weren't having anything of that nature. Maybe like a bit of fat or something like that, but no carbs anyway. And their glycogen before, muscle glycogen, was exactly the same as both groups. And then directly after, the keto group actually had slightly higher glycogen, but fairly similar. And then 3 hours later, very similar, almost exactly the same glycogen levels, while the carb athletes were sucking down carbs and the keto athletes were not. They also found, maybe it was in the Volek one that I'm thinking of, they looked at the VO2 max and what sort of energy they were using. Typically, it's said that you can only use fat. You're only going to burn fat up to 60% VO2 max. You get your zone 2 run, you're in that fat burning zone, and then after that, you're just burning carbs. That's actually only if you're eating carbs. Is that the case? When you're in a ketogenic state, especially if you're fat adapted, actually before you're fat adapted, you're just not going to use the ketones and fat properly. But you will actually, your fat oxidation will go way up even right away. But let's assume you're fat adapted, you're going to utilize that a lot better. You're still doing fat oxidation, well over 90% VO2 max, and like 92% VO2 max, still predominantly burning fat. It's only about 10% of these athletes what they were burning were carbs. And you're making carbs, you're making glucose, you're making glycogen. They even had studies in wolves back in 1981 when everyone was just like, well, you need carbs to burn carbs. And they're like, well, hold on, these wolves are just loping around for just hours, chasing caribou, and they don't carb load for, before they go on these 10-hour runs. Do they have glycogen? Do they have blood sugar? Let's test it out. And they found that, yes, they do. And it's rock solid. It does not change. When they're at rest, when they're chasing the animals and they're hunting, after they're eating, it is here. And that's because they're in ketosis. And so that's what their body's doing. So they're primarily, it's fat oxidation, but they'll also use some glycogen and glucose as well. But you're constantly making this stuff up as you go. Your liver is very good at that. What that does to the GKI, I don't know hard numbers for you, but it should, in principle, lower your GKI.
One of the things that we talked about with Dr. Seyfried, actually, before we even got on camera, was a paper that he wrote back in 2000 or 2001, where he was looking at the ketogenic diet and epilepsy. And in just a small passage in there, he talked about the effects of vagus nerve stimulation on epilepsy, and he postulated that it was possible that vagus nerve stimulation would have an effect on the production of ketones, that it would somehow accelerate or enhance the production of ketones. And I know from the work that I've done going back to the 1960s that the work that was done on vagus nerve stimulation and the effect on the liver, increasing glycogen synthetase, reducing gluconeogenesis, and having effects that were more potent than a direct shot of insulin. And my question, and it's still out there, and he didn't know the answer, and I don't suspect that anybody does. It sounds like it's work that needs to be done, is looking to see whether or not vagus nerve stimulation can accelerate the time it takes to get into that therapeutic GKI below 2 state, and whether or not vagus nerve stimulation could actually end up being, by putting yourself into that parasympathetic state versus a sympathetic state, whether or not that drives you into a more, as you said, the basal state for metabolism is a ketogenic state. If you're driving yourself into that homeostatic state through your autonomic nervous system with vagus nerve stimulation, does that go hand in glove, and you get into that ketogenic state more quickly, more easily, more in some ways, with less effort. It would be really fascinating to see whether or not vagus nerve stimulation has that effect. I think if it did, it would be a real positive thing for the therapy that I'm part of developing.
Yeah. No, I think that would be great to do. It'd be very interesting and certainly worth a look. I mean, it wouldn't be all that hard to put together either. I mean, just get a group of people and give it a try.
Yeah.
And record the results. So yeah, that would be very interesting.
Wonderful. Gentlemen, this has been a wonderful conversation. I feel like we could go on for hours and hours, and we might have to have you back real soon, Dr. Chaffee, to do that.
Happy to.
But I want to honor your time. I know it's very late for you where you are. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to put links up to your YouTube and to your Instagram. Make sure that everybody's aware. If you're following, if you're not yet, please do follow Dr. Chaffee. He's got wonderful information out there for everybody, especially if you're really interested in getting started in this journey. Dr. Chaffee, personally, I loved the evolutionary explanations, understanding how humanity evolved into where we are right now, and the fact that there are clear evolutionary patterns that show that carnivore is the diet that we were built to be on and thrive on. And so thank you for sharing those with us. JP, any final thoughts here?
No, I just look forward to the dialogue continuing and maybe getting a little research done together.
Yeah, fantastic. I'd be more than happy to. Sounds good.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your time. And we will absolutely be in touch to keep the conversation going. And so if you got to this point in the podcast, please make sure to share this with one person who you think could utilize this information really powerfully to go and upgrade their health. Thank you guys so much. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you.